righty. Okay. Well, today I want to look at Matthew 5, and we're going to start in verse 13. Some of the things I like to study is when there's an aspect or a statement or whatever that just doesn't make sense to me. Then I got to, hunt it down a little bit more. And this is one of those. So let's look at Matthew 5:13. And it says, "You are the salt of the earth, but what good is salt that has lost its flavor? Can you make it salty again? It will be thrown out and trampled underfoot as worthless." Okay? When we look at this verse, there's really not a definition for it. So therefore, we kind of put our own experiences and our own understanding into what it means. We all have our own experience of what salt is, right? And we have our own explanation of what that would be because we interject that onto that. We know that salt affects its environment simply by being what it is, not by saying, doing anything. In the same way, if we're going to be salt, it'll simply be by being what we are, not by saying, doing anything. Salt is simply is what it's meant to be. It's salt. Okay. And I'm guessing that every sermon you've ever heard on salt talks about the preservation or the flavoring aspect. Kind of like if you just take a little sprinkling of salt, a little sprinkling of Christians, that somehow that makes the atmosphere, sweeter, or that we are somehow like a museum of society. We hold it up and we save it. We have it, and it stays just like that. But the Luke Gospel tells us what it's meant in Matthew. So if we go back and we look at Luke 14, and that's in 34, 35, it's going to tell us a little bit more about what salt is. It says salt's good for seasoning, but if salt were to lose its flavor, how could it be restored again? It will never be useful again, not even fit for the soil or the manure pile. Okay?
Pretty straightforward
right there. So there Jesus defines what he means. He is referring to the soil, the land, or dung pile. This tells us what salt was used for. Okay, we're back in Israel, and it was scraped up from the Dead Sea, which is 28% salt solution. And now that's not sodium chloride alone, but a mixture of various salts. There's all different kinds in that mix. And one of the main ones is potassium chloride, which is known as potash. If you're a gardener, you fertilizer, you know that every plant needs 3 kinds of fertilizer: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Okay? Phosphate is to develop the roots. Nitrogen develops the leaves. And the plant needs potash to develop the flowers and the fruit. A balanced fertilizer is going to include all 3. So the salt, which was scraped up from the Dead Sea, was largely used as fertilizer. And mainly because of the potash in it, along with the other things too, which is one of the things is magnesium bromide and a bunch of other major salts. There was also sodium chloride, quite a bit of it. And of course this was used in the kitchen. But Jesus here, because we look at Luke, we see that he's thinking about its use as a fertilizer. He said on the soil. It's used on the soil. And the soil here is exactly the same word as earth in Matthew. So salt of the earth, salt of the fertilizer. The salt you put on the soil to make things grow. And then we're going to see he mentions the dunghill. For reference, the word here, the word they use is not animal manure, but human manure. So he's now talking about the backyard, okay? The custom in those days was to have a heap of dirt at the bottom of the yard. Okay, you had a hole, some pile of dirt, and when you emptied your bowels, you put some dirt over it, and then there was a box next to it with salt. And you took a big handful and put it on the soil. That was your disinfectant to stop the spread of things you didn't want to grow. Okay? So those two examples together gives us a negative and a positive, right? If you promoted the things you did want to grow, and it also would inhibit the spread of things that you didn't want. That's a vivid picture that Christians are to be the salt of the soil. So here we go through a clear picture. You know, Jesus always used the familiar pictures from ordinary life, and he used them to illustrate Christian life. So you're the people of the soil. You're the ones that will stop bad things from spreading and who will promote good things that are wanted. You're the salt. Not really by saying anything or doing anything. I thought it was interesting, the last song, you don't have to prove anything, you know, and but by being totally different from the environment. In the kitchen, a little sprinkle of salt is going to do. You get too much, you know, it's not word, you don't like it, but a little salt in the soul, there you go, that's enough. But as a fertilizer, I said the soul, the soup, but as a fertilizer or disinfectant, you need a considerable amount before the effect shows. You need handfuls in both cases. A little sprinkling on soil is not going to do much if you just take that little deal and you just sprinkle it. So therefore the concept is of being salt in society with a certain proportion of that society being Christians. Being different, being salt. The simple fact is, right now in our world we don't have enough salt. And that's why social trends are going the wrong way. There's no way for that to be reversed until we have enough salt to do the trick. In other words, you know, we might win an occasional battle. We might protest or lobby, but we'll lose the war as a whole unless we have the soldiers, basically, okay? Because there's an insufficient amount of salt. So you can apply that to any situation. You know, we can read the papers, we can moan about what's going on in the world and the society. It's because we've lost the amount of salt we once had. But we once had it, but we no longer have. I remember, and it's been several years ago, talking about the numbers in the churches going down. How many churches were closing because they just don't have the numbers. And this is what we're talking about here. So we can't expect this to reverse until we have the amount of salt we need. So, how much do we need? The good news is, when any society or community, when there's 5% salt, the social trends reverse for the better. Now I know Lance Wallnell says that it only takes 2 if it's top. You know, if it's leadership position, you only have to have 2%. But generally, 5%, it will reverse it for the better. And it's not anything in particular the 5% is doing, saying, but just by being the 5%. Until we are producing enough salt to save society, we're going to continue to work in situations that we're just losing ground, where it's increasingly difficult to be a Christian. We can see that right now, can't we?
Yeah.
Right now, you know, the tide is running against us, and that's the quantitative aspect of salt. A little sprinkle's no good. We need shovelfuls right now, and right now we just don't have them. The second aspect is one of not only the amount, but of the distribution. Salt is no good in the box. It has to be in direct contact with the dirt before it can operate. In other words, it operates by presence. We talked about presence, not by absence. If all the salt is lumped up, just as we're all lumped here right now, okay, because we're all Christians, then we can't be the salt of the earth. We can't do it because why? We're out of contact with the earth. So we need 5% salt, but these 5%, if they're all going to Christian schools and churches, they won't be salt. To operate properly, the salt has to be in direct physical contact with the dirt. And this is why, another reason why marketplace ministry is so important and why we should bring our Christianity to every aspect of our lives. In a factory setting where there's 5% Christian presence, the language changes without really anybody saying anything. Think of the place you work. And we shouldn't gripe because we are in direct contact with the dirt. That's precisely where you can connect. It does need that 5%, and right now there's a disturbing trend among Christians to try to get out of the dirt and get into a Christian setting or situation. Mm-hmm. There's a man I was listening to, and he told the story of a girl coming to him and saying, "Isn't it wonderful? I am the only Christian in the office where I work, and it's so hard. But I've seen an ad, it's from a Christian firm, and they want somebody. And I have the qualifications, and I've been accepted into the Christian firm." And then she was just looking forward to starting the day with prayer, being able to visit, with other Christians, which, that's fine. But then she saw his face. She said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "You've just told me you're the only Christian in the office, and now they have no contact with Jesus." Mm-hmm. And we don't think about that, I don't think, often enough. That needs to be an encouragement for us to stay, for some of us to stay where we are and to remain in the vocation in which we've been called. Mm-hmm. He put you right there because he wanted some salt right there. Now, we can pray that some more Christians join us and help us make up that 5% or greater, but we shouldn't run away and just, not join the circus, but kind of the Christian group, the Christian outfit. We need salt in our national, local government. We need salt in our schools, our universities. And we've heard that. Mm-hmm. The Christians don't have a place in politics. They don't have a place in this. They don't have a place. And here is this parable, and it's saying you do not only have a place, you should have a place. You're required to have a place. And the more we shrink back into all Christian settings, the less the salt can operate. We have to be in contact with the dirt. And then the third aspect of salt, and maybe the most important, is the aspect of quality. First, we know salt is needed in any certain amount in any situation. The second, it has to be in direct contact with the dirt situation if it's going to influence it. And the third, it must be real salt. Okay, Jesus talked about salt losing its savor. And this is where I always it always tripped me up, because who's ever tasted salt when it wasn't salty? Okay, so can sodium chloride lose its salty quality? I never understood that. And the answer is no, it can't. Okay, it is a physical impossibility. But if it happened in Jesus' day, what happened for him to be able to talk to us about that? So in Matthew 5:13, it asks, how can salt lose its savor? And it's this very simple way, not by ceasing to be sodium chloride, but by being adulterated with other things. In those days, a clever salt dealer might scrape up plenty of sand with the salt on the Dead Sea shores. So a lot of it wasn't salt at all. And that's the only way salt can lose its saltiness, is by having a whole bunch of other stuff mixed in with it. Then it loses its quality, and a housewife of that time who bought adulterated salt that was like half sand, half salt, she'd just throw it out the door and onto the street. Men would walk it in the dirt from where it came from. And so the lesson here is pretty obvious. Christians will only influence the world if they're different from it. There's a saying, the lifeboat, in this case that would be the church, the lifeboat should be in the sea, but when the sea gets in the lifeboat, you're in trouble. Our real dilemma is not just that we don't have enough salt, but the salt that we do have is losing its saltness. It's very rapidly being adulterated by having too much of the humanistic, secular society around it. Mm-hmm. It is getting right in among Christians because the pressure is enormous to conform. You know, we see, unfortunately, where some of the drag queens came and talked to the kids, and that's going on in our churches as well.
Really? Well, I know the Christian
did
left.
see some pictures.
They're definitely getting they're purposely infiltrating
Yes.
Christianity, knowing that they're not Christians.
Exactly. And so what does that do? You know, that just brings what we are, it adulterates what we are to where we have lost some, or lost our saltiness. And it's in this way that Christianity can lose its savor. Jesus said if it does, all it will do is produce contempt, and the world will treat it with disgust. So then we have the spectacle of Christians trying to be credible to their current generation. Is that what we're called to do? Are we called to just be credible? Or are we called to be different? That's the real issue. The feeling we've got to be with it, you know, be one of the gang, be one of the crowd. Sometimes we feel like we have to go along with the contemporary society or that we'll lose them. We see that. Some Christians, their stand on abortion and homosexuality is completely out of line with what the Bible says. But it is in line with what society is saying.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, at least in that aspect of their lives, they are being adulterated with something that's not Christianity.
Yeah.
That's not. They're losing their saltness. So that is the way the salt loses its savor. It's not the way to save society. We should be leading society into a better way. And then Jesus said something that's too often dismissed. He said, if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? And the answer was, it can't. Once it loses its saltness, it can't get it back. And once an individual Christian loses their reputation, it's almost impossible to get it back again.
Mm-hmm.
We see some high-level preachers that have made some missteps, and their ministry is, I won't say gone, but it's diminished so much
Never to
that
level.
it has never come back to what it was.
Yeah.
I don't know in any case where they have allowed different things to pollute their ministry where they've ever been able to come back full force.
Yeah.
So what is saltness? We have to look back at the Beatitudes to understand this, and that's where we're at, is in the Beatitudes. Once you've read them correctly, they're almost the exact opposite of the attitudes of the world we live in. So I'm just going to kind of briefly go over some of that. Jesus talks about being poor in spirit. Okay, that's to be despised by the world. It means to lack self-confidence in the sense that we say, God, if you don't help me, I can't do it. The world, you know, the self-confident, they're proud in spirit. They say, you know, stand up for yourself. I can do it. The poor in spirit's the opposite. It says, hey, this is beyond me. And if you don't help me, I can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a self-confidence, it's God confidence. You know, you always like to say, oh yeah, we're self-confident, but we ought to be God confident.
Yeah.
Just change that wording a little bit. It's hard to be in mourning in a world that just, you know, wants to joke around all the time. And it's hard to weep when others laugh, or to be meek when the world is an aggressive, combative place. And then he says to hunger and thirst for righteousness. Okay? That means those whose ambition is to live right. We're not talking about ambitions in the way the world sees it, but to live right. Their desire to live right is their major ambition.
Yeah.
That kind of person will be salt. Not that person whose top ambition is to be famous or wealthy or powerful. And there's not anything wrong with those things, but if that's what they're striving for, their top ambition, then they're missing that mark.
Yeah.
And to be merciful. He talks about being merciful. In a competitive, cruel, opportunistic world, it's hard. To be merciful is to give others a chance to be pure in heart. That not only means to be clean in desires, it means to be unmixed in motives, and not to have ulterior motives. To be motivated by simple, pure motives in what you do, like in your career. You want to, achieve, but I don't want to have to put, I don't have to put Margie down in order to promote myself. I don't have to spread a lie about this, or I take credit for somebody else's work. Okay? That's what we're talking about. It's not that you don't want to be the best you can, but we do not want to have ulterior motives and methods to be able to do what we do. And then there's the peacemakers rather than the fighters. Jesus was a realist. When he outlined the character of salt in this way, he realized from his own experiences that that was the surest way to be persecuted. It's why he added a little extra beatitude in Matthew 10. We glance at that. It says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." When people say all kinds of bad things about you, he knew that old saying, whether it was the exact words, sticks and stone will break your bones, but words will never hurt you. He knew that was like an adage that was just the most wrong, untrue adage that's ever been created. Because what people say does hurt. People's words can hurt you. So Jesus said, "Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me." Because if you're going to be salt in your situation, that's going to happen. People will not believe you have unmixed motives. Mm-hmm. You think about that. If you ever said something, especially in a corrective sense, there's people just waiting to get themselves in a wad, They can't believe you're doing it for the right reasons. Satan was ever the slanderer and the accuser of the brethren. So Jesus said, if you are going to be salt, it's going to be tough. And it's not going to pay in this world, but it will in the next. Okay? We look at Matthew 5:12. It says, "Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way that they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Okay? You have to have faith to believe your reward is going to be big. Because you're not going to see your full reward in heaven. In this world. This fly is pestering.
Yes. He kept laying on my nose in worship.
So, our full reward is not going to be in this world. We've got to realize that. We cannot think this is all there ever is going to be. So it depends on where you want your reward and where you're looking for your reward. Our choice as Christians is contempt or hatred in this world. You're either good salt, in which you're going to get contempt, or you're bad salt, and you lose your saltiness, and then you'll still get contempt, okay? That's your choices right there. So a Christian loses in this world. But if you're a real salt, there's going to be a great reward in the next. I'm going to say we're going to lose everything in this world because we still have Jesus, we still have assurance, we still have Holy Spirit, we still have help. But from a human perspective, a society perspective, they don't understand, what that means. So therefore, in their eyes, you have nothing, you are nothing, you've given up everything to have what they see as something useless.
Right.
So now we're going to go on about light. I thought it was interesting because I was listening, and this is just a little side note here, is that it was this week. I was listening to a program. I believe it was Sid Roth program. Anyway, the lady said, in the original language, it didn't say "let there be light." That sounds so, It said the actual thing was "light be," like a command. Mm-hmm. Light be, and so there was just like that light that was already there, just be and be in the world, and make the world what it is today. Okay, so we're talking about light. And in this case, light also has its positive and its negative aspects. So if we read Matthew and then in 14 through 16, It says, you are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. Okay? So he said, I'm the light of the world. You're the light of the world. He didn't say, I'm the salt of the earth. I thought that was kind of interesting. He didn't say that. He said, I'm the light of the world. Mm-hmm. All right. But he did say, I am the light. That's something for me to ponder a little bit more on. And on this occasion, in which he said it, it's very fascinating. Okay, here's another little bonus thing that I had not known. It's in the context of the woman taken in adultery. Okay, this is a story that I thought I understood, but then when I studied it, I realized I didn't get it, the whole full story. Okay, it's a Jewish story. The Jews understood this story, and they could explain it to us because they're Jewish, okay? In this situation, they've caught a woman in the very act of adultery, so they brought her to Jesus, knowing that the law of Moses said she must be stoned. Okay, we all know that. They also knew that the Roman law at that time forbade any executions by Jews. I did not know that.
They're trying to trip him up.
They knew that if Jesus said stone her, it would go against Roman law. If he said don't stone her, then he was going against the law of Moses. In other words, yeah, they tracked him between the law of Rome, the law of Moses. Okay? It's true that the law of Moses said she must be stoned. So what did Jesus do? He wrote with his finger in the dirt. Okay? Now, this is the part that blew my mind. Now, to a Jew, that means one thing. Does anybody know what that means? Because I didn't.
I've heard like judgment. Your names are being written down.
To the Jews, it says it's a claim to be God. It's a claim to be the one who wrote the 10 Commandments with his finger on the stone. So was Jesus subtly saying, I wrote the law? Now, they said Jews would come to that conclusion. We don't when we hear it in church because we're not Jewish. Okay, a finger writing. I've heard preachers ask and wonder what Jesus wrote, and there's been different, speculation, but that's not really the point. It's a vivid act, and he was claiming to be responsible for the law that had gone through, and he basically had been talking about throughout Rome. Okay, Moses said, I say unto you, that's what I meant when I gave that law. That was my intention behind it. And then this was something that I had not heard before. Jesus reminded them of another law of Moses, which the crowd had forgotten. That is, it is a very simple law. It says nobody can be a witness in a criminal charge if they have ever committed the same crime. Okay, so John 8:7 says, so when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, who is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone. He didn't mean, which we all kind of have, I've always kind of thought, you need to be morally perfect before you can punish anyone, because that's how we take it. But that would rule out parents being able to punish their children, police and judges being able to punish criminals, because no judge is going to be without sin. But he was quoting the law in Exodus 23:2. And that says, you shall not follow a crowd to do evil, nor you should testify in a dispute as to turn aside after many to pervert justice. Okay? In other words, here in this situation, if you've ever committed adultery, you can't be a witness in this case.
So then they got publicly shamed too because they all had to walk away.
That is when they begin, yes, that's when they begin to go away one by one.
Yeah.
Begin with the oldest.
Yeah, because
The youngest ones tried to brazen it out, but even they had to admit that they had done it. Okay? And then John 8:9, I'm not going to even, that's when they talked about that they all began to leave. So in fact, the witnesses were dismissed on the basis of the law. Okay? Are y'all getting
So
this?
he didn't break the law at all.
Right.
Right.
Then he looked up, this is in 10, and he asked the woman, where are your accusers? Where are your witnesses? Are they all gone? Okay? And then in Deuteronomy 19:15, there's another point of the law. There had to be witnesses, 2 or 3. Okay? We know that was violated when they tried Jesus, right? That was one of the things they broke. I'm going to interject a little something here because it occurred to me and I wondered this week pondering that. We've been talking in Kings, and Nathan went to Bathsheba. Then Bathsheba went before the king. Okay? And then he came before the king. There was 2 witnesses of what Adonai was doing. All right? There was 2 witnesses. I don't know if that is because, I'm not sure exactly why that is. If it wouldn't necessarily be a criminal court,
Well,
it would be, I guess,
sedition.
against Adonai. And then he was judged. So I don't know if that was a point because there had to be 2 or 3 witnesses to a crime. And Bathsheba then was one that came before the king, and then Nathan was the other one that came before the king. Okay, so that's something to ponder.
Because it had to be legal.
Then we know in Revelation there's 2 witnesses. Are the 2 witnesses before the judgment, before God judges the earth? 2 witnesses. Okay. I'll throw that out there for y'all to think about. Okay. But if there weren't 2 or 3 witnesses, then the case had to be dropped. Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you," because at that point he was the only witness.
And he was really the only one that could have stoned her too, because he hadn't done it.
So, yes, he was the only witness, and there had to be 2. So then he was allowed, even by law, to be able to drop this. Okay?
He's her lawyer.
Yes.
Like literally.
Yes. Because there were no other witnesses. It was dismissed, but remember, he said, don't do it again.
Right.
I might not be around to defend you. My
Straighten up,
recommendation,
girl.
if y'all get into trouble, get Jesus to be your lawyer, okay? He was brilliant. He showed them that he knew the law better than they did, and that he was going to use the very law of Moses to sort out the situation. That's amazing. I did not realize all the nuances of this. But when she had gone, notice he said, don't do it again. For mercy is not offered to us to go back into sin, but to stop. And then at this point, some more crowd had come together. And in verse 12, he said, I'm the light of the world. He who follows me won't walk in darkness, but have the light of life. Now, that tells us a profound truth about what light is meant to be. It is not what we say or do. It is what we are. What he's saying